If you watch the news, you probably have an opinion about the war between Israelis and Palestinians. Like on many topics, most of us have just a superficial understanding of what's happening and don't spend too much time thinking or talking about it. But if you are among those with strong feelings on this matter, I want you to think about a few questions. It's okay if you don't know the answer to many of them, but if you really care about this topic, you should at least ponder these issues. Do this alone so you feel no pressure to shout out a response. No one is watching, so take your time with each question and feel free to do any research you want as you go along. My first question is very simple. If everyone wants to live in peace and support the two-state solution, why aren't there two states today? Who has mostly opposed this idea? If the answer is Netanyahu and his far-right coalition, why was this already a problem when left-wing prime ministers ruled Israel, like Golda Meir, or Yitzhak Rabin, or Shimon Peres, or Ehud Barak? If the problem is the Israeli settlements, why was the Arab world already trying to destroy Israel in 1948, in 1967, and in 1973? In all those years, they launched wars with the explicit intention to annihilate the Jews, but there wasn't a single illegal settlement in the West Bank or Gaza. In fact, Israel didn't even capture those lands until 1967. Could it be that the settlements are an aggravation, but not the real cause behind this conflict? If the Palestinian goal is to recover the occupied territories, that is, the West Bank and Gaza, and not the destruction of Israel proper, why didn't the Palestinians accept the proposals made to them in 2008 and in 2000, which included 95% of the land that they claimed to want and compensation for the rest? And again, why didn't they build a state between 1948 and 1967, when the lands were under Arab control and there were no Israeli settlements or occupation of any kind? Why didn't they accept the UN partition plan in 1947, which would have given them even more than Gaza and the West Bank? Why did they reject the Peel Commission proposal from 1937, which would have given them almost all of Israel-Palestine? What was the Arab counterproposal in each of these cases? Did they ever offer one? If this is not the ancestral land of the Jews, where does the term Jew come from? Why is this land referred to as Israel or Judea in books that were written in Hebrew centuries before Arabic was a language and the Arabs became a nation with Islam as their main religion? Why do you call this city Jerusalem, which comes from the Hebrew Yerushalayim, and not something more similar to Beit ul-Maqdisi, which is its name in Arabic? If modern Israelis are mostly white European colonialists, why are half of its Jews of Middle Eastern or African descent? Where did they come from, and why? If Jews are guilty of ethnically cleansing all Arabs, and not the other way around, why are there 2 million Arabs living in Israel today? And I don't mean in the West Bank or Gaza, but in Israel proper, where they enjoy full rights as Israeli citizens. And what happened to the almost 900,000 Jews who lived in Arab countries when Israel was created? Where did they go? And why are there virtually no Jews left in those countries today? By the way, feel free to go back to the previous question if you want a hint to this one. If Israel's goal is to kill innocent Palestinians, why haven't they killed them all? Do you believe Hamas could actually stop the Israeli army if it was really trying to carry out a genocide? Why would Israel risk their own soldiers if their air force could easily wipe out half the population of Gaza in a few hours? Is it possible that Israel is fighting a very complicated war and not just willfully carrying out a massacre? Could this war be somehow justified? Is there such a thing as a justified war? If not, would you have demanded that Americans avoid fighting Britain to obtain their independence? Would you have condemned the North for fighting the South in order to abolish slavery? Would you have marched on the streets accusing the Allies of committing genocide because their bombings killed hundreds of thousands of German civilians and demand an immediate stop to the war, allowing the Nazi Party to remain in power? If Ukrainian forces started to make gains in their war against Russia, and the Russians called for a ceasefire, but retain the right to resume fighting whenever they choose, would you demand that Ukraine withdraw from the territory they've captured and accept those terms? Has Hamas ever offered anything other than that? If so, when? If the Arabs, who are Israeli citizens, were given the option to live in the, quote, apartheid evil Jewish country, or one ruled by the Palestinians who want to, quote, free them, what do you think they would choose, and why? If Israel were to disappear tomorrow and the land was claimed for the Palestinian Arabs, what would happen to its Jews? What kind of state would exist? Would there be freedom of religion, freedom of speech and press, freedom to elect leaders without coercion? What would happen to LGBTQ people? How much equality would there be for women? If the Palestinians are mostly in favor of peace and a two-state solution, why are there no mass demonstrations in support of this? Why are chants of war and intifada shouted enthusiastically by tens of thousands, but we barely see any manifestations for peace and tolerance in Gaza, or Ramallah, or Nablus, or, for that matter, in Amman or Damascus or Beirut? Which Palestinian leaders or politicians have openly stated that the Jewish country has a right to exist? Do you know of any? If so, how popular are they among their people? If you worry that Israel's actions will further radicalize the Palestinians, is it fair to ask how Palestinian actions help radicalize Israelis as well? Is it possible that Palestinians are active participants in this conflict and not just victims of someone else's actions? Is it reasonable to question if their situation, awful as it is, to some extent, a consequence of their own choices? Why are we always trying to put pressure on Israel, a pluralistic country with political parties that span the entire spectrum, and where left-leaning and openly pro-peace parties have traditionally gotten millions of votes, but not so much on the Palestinians, where none of that exists? Why do we interpret Israeli votes for right-wing parties as a sign of stubbornness, fanaticism, and warmongering, but Palestinian support for Hamas and their violent acts are seen as understandable, even justifiable reactions to the above? Is it possible that we have this backwards? Could it be that Israel's left-leaning voters, once a robust majority, have dwindled because they are exasperated with the Palestinians' constant rejection of their peace offers? If Israel decided to unilaterally give back Gaza and the West Bank, so the Palestinians can have their country, would they let the Jews have their own? Would the Palestinians agree to live in peace next to it? Do you think it's reasonable for Israelis to be skeptical about this? If so, how should their concerns be addressed? What kind of conditions or arrangements should be made in order to ensure that what happened in Gaza when Israel withdrew won't happen in the West Bank? By the way, did you know that Israel actually did leave Gaza in 2005 and removed every single soldier and settler from there? What did they get in return? Is it possible that our hatred of Israel has more to do with a desire to find a scapegoat that we can accuse of the world's worst sins and wrongdoings, so we can feel good and righteous people who are, quote, on the right side of history? Or maybe it is fueled by an understandable but misguided longing to be part of a romantic and heroic resistance, but it's not really based on our knowledge of the facts, the context, and the reality that Israelis have had to face since their country was born. Could it be that Israel is more accurately described as a democracy that, while flawed, does its best to uphold liberal values and, like any country that has fought wars, has at times made mistakes and abused its strength? But it's not really anything like the bloodthirsty, evil, genocidal oppressor that some people insist it is. By the way, if your goal is not peace or a two-state solution, but rather the destruction of the Jewish state, do you accept the fact that you are an anti-Semite? If not, what else would you call someone who seeks to stripe the Jews, and only the Jews, of their right to self-determination, and place them at the mercy of an evidently hostile regime that has openly stated their intentions and has actually tried to murder them and expel them from their country? Do you really expect the Jews to simply throw their arms in the air and submissively accept this fate just to appease the angry mob and its demands for what it calls justice? Would you?